In 2012, a judge ruled that cheerleading is not an official sport. That same year, a federal appeals court agreed, making cheerleading not an official sport. The American Medical Association says cheerleading should be considered a sport because of its rigors and risks. The sport is one of the most dangerous as it uses the strength of multiple people to do unimaginable things. We need to make cheerleading an official sport due to the fact that it meets the same requirements as most other official sports. I was a cheerleader in my hometown, and in that time, we faced many obstacles. We were told that we couldn't be an official team because cheerleading wasn't a real sport. Some things I found strange about this is that we had many of the same requirements that the other teams had, such as we had to be at practices for 2 hours, 5 days a week, and in order to participate at the first sport of the year, which was football, we had to have 10 practices total, and that would mean that we had to practice in the summer, whereas 9 times out of 10 the football boys were not practicing as much as us. This is us in my high school cheer team doing a stunt. And that's just a fraction of what we did compared to other days. I will be talking to you guys today about why cheerleading should be an official sport and give more examples as to why I believe so. I will start with talking about how cheerleading is very dangerous compared to some sports. Next, I will show examples of why cheerleading is more dangerous than many other sports. Lastly, I will talk with the vigorous requirements it takes to be a cheerleader and explain why we need to make it an official sport. Now that I have introduced my topic, I will show you a few of the things cheerleaders do. This is what we call a pyramid. In total, it takes 15 cheerleaders. This is a elevator. There are 2 types of elevators. There is that one, and then there's this one. This is an extended, and the one I showed you first is a basic elevator. As you can see, cheerleaders do unimaginable things that you don't see in any other sports. Cheerleaders have to use both mental and physical attributes to keep everyone safe. Yes, other sports do this as well, but this activity does this for longer periods of time, as well as the fact that they focus and only focus on doing these things, not just running around a field with a football. Beyond the evidence supporting my position that cheerleading should be a sport, there are thousands of scientific studies that show cheerleading is a vigorous and dangerous activity. Approximately 66% of all catastrophic injuries in either high school or college female athletes occur due to cheerleading accidents, according to ESPN. With that information, I did some more research and found that cheerleading, according to the recent study by Columbus Children's Hospital in Ohio, that there were 22,900 cheerleading-related injuries in 2002. That is triple the amount of cheerleading injuries we see today. The reason for these statistics is the amount of rules and regulations cheer has, which should make it a sport. Cheer is not considered a sport because they do not compete against other teams. This is not true. There are many cheer competitions, and unlike the other sports in cheer you compete with more than one school every competition. On average, at a cheer competition, you compete with a minimum of 5 schools at once. There are so many more specific rules to cheerleading than there are for other sports, and I will read off a few of them. All squads must have a qualified coach who makes sure to uphold the rules of cheerleading in practice, as well as competitions. The coach has to make sure that the athletes or squad don't move on to more difficult skills until they have gained proficiency at their prior skills. Also, cheerleaders are only allowed to do stunts listed as allowed for their level or ones that are allowed in earlier levels. When practicing new skills, there must be trained spotters for cheerleaders to practice with until they are confident with the skill. During practices, competitions, athletes must perform on an appropriate surface in order to stay safe. Surfaces such as concrete, asphalt, wet, or uneven surfaces are not allowed. And additionally, any apparatus that helps athletes to jump higher is not allowed during practices without proper supervision. These also are not allowed in competitions with the exception of the spring floor. In competitions, there are even more rules than athletes must follow. Cheerleaders must wear solid, soft-sole shoes during competition, and it is against the rules to have any edible food like gum, candy, or cough drops in an athlete's mouth during competition in order to avoid choking hazards. This is just some of the few thousand rules that cheerleaders have to follow. When I was in high school, we would practice anywhere from 10 and plus hours a week, and we would put our bodies through the most that I've ever put my body through. In practices, we would come in, we would sit down, we'd get like our pep, and then we'd run for 30 minutes. Then we'd start stunts, and then if we dropped a stunt, we had to run again for 30 minutes. And then we'd go back and we practice our dances without a break until we had it perfect. And so, like, I understand that other sports have a lot of requirements too, but I do feel that cheer has a significant amount that can compare to other sports. Therefore, I believe that it should be a sport too. To sum up, cheerleaders are as committed, if not more, to this what should be considered sport as other athletes are to their sports. The requirements to be a cheerleader are very detailed, as well as the participants have to be very much committed to it, meaning cheer should ultimately be considered a sport. This is a very dangerous activity that should at least be classified as a sport because cheerleaders do the same amount of work, if not more, than other sports. Cheerleading is also more vigorous, and you have to be more dedicated to ultimately avoid serious injury from occurring. Cheerleaders work 5 days a week to total a minimum of at least 5 hours of practice on top of school, work, and other activities. As we can see, this sport takes just as much effort and determination as do other sports. The requirements in order to be a team are more specific and hit every aspect. Cheerleading is also a very physically demanding activity that should be required a sport.